in this demo, we're going to look at creating a salary report with some new tools in Excel. We're going to create a salary report for this fictional art supply company. So we have a list of employees, their hourly rate of pay, and then we're going to use some new functions and some new tools to help populate the rest of this content. Some of the new things that we're going to look at include flash fill. So flash fill allows us to generate some content based on a specific pattern. So we're going to use flash fill to create these email addresses, create the list. We're also going to look at some new functions that we haven't used yet, max, min, average, and we're also going to look at conditional formatting. So conditional formatting, there's an example here. You can apply some rules, and if those rules are met, then you can change the look of those cells. So in this case, under the hours worked column, anybody who's worked more than 72 hours in this 2-week period, we're going to change the background color and the font color to help us highlight that. So let's get started. If you want to follow along with this demo, you can pause the video here and type in the content that we have so far. So in cell 1A, Olivia's art supply, cell A2 is the salary report. Then down here we have a list of employees, last name first, so last name, comma, first name. Email address, we don't have anything in there yet. Number of dependents, so the size of their family, which will come into one of the calculations later on. The number of hours they've worked in the last 2 weeks, their hourly rate, and their hire date. So these are things that you would typically enter manually. The other pieces, we're going to try to use some of the new tools to help us generate that content and figure out the math for us. So you can pause this and type these out, but to save you some time, I'm just going to move right through it. So when we look at the content that we're going to cover here, we're going to look at flash fill. We're going to enter formulas in some different ways, both using the keyboard and just using the mouse. The new functions we're going to look at are max, min, and average. So max will take the maximum value in a series. Min will take the minimum value, and average will take that average mean. We're going to confirm that we've done this properly. We're going to change the theme. We're going to change some of the formatting, including conditional formatting. So conditional formatting allows you to visually highlight cells when they meet a certain criteria. We'll change the width and the height of the rows and columns, double check spelling, and then we will have what looks like this in the end. So we're going to start right here. The first thing that we're going to do once you have all of this typed out, we're going to get right into flash fill to help us generate these email addresses. So flash fill can be quite useful if you have a long list of things that you're trying to put together that follows a really specific format. So in this case, we're going to use flash fill to generate these email addresses based on last name and first name. So I'm going to type the first two out. Well, I'll type the first one to start anyways. So the pattern that we're going to follow is first initial, last name, at email.com. I've already typed this, so once you press enter, this will change to underlined and a different color because it recognizes that it's an email address. As you were typing, it might not change right away, but I had already typed this before, so that's why mine was showing up. So now if we follow the same pattern again, first initial, last name, at email.com. Now there's enough here for Excel to recognize that there's a pattern here. To do this, we can just highlight the entire range, including the two cells that we manually entered. Then we can just go up to data and then flash fill. So what flash fill will do is it'll look at that pattern that we've already created and try to figure out the rest. And you can see that it's generated that content for us. So next we're going to look at a few different ways to create these formulas to calculate the different columns here. If we look at what we have so far, so I've added these in, but I'll show you how to create these in a second. If we look at what we have so far, we have the employees' names, their email addresses that we used flash fill to create, dependents, so the number of people that they're supporting in their household, hours worked in the last 2 weeks, their hourly rate, and their date of hire. Then we're going to use different formulas to create these columns here. So if we look at gross pay, so that's just the total pay that they're receiving from this company. That's just their hourly rate multiplied by the number of hours they worked in that 2-week period. So clicking on this cell, I've already created this formula here, but you can see it's just the equal sign, and then it's E4, so this cell multiplied by the number of hours worked. So we can create that just by typing equals on the keyboard, clicking on this cell, press the little star on your keyboard or Shift 8, and then the number of hours worked. So here we're reading the cell by saying equals cell E5 multiplied by D5. You'll also notice that E5 is blue, and that corresponds to the way this cell is highlighted, and D5 is red, and that corresponds to how this cell is highlighted. Then I can press enter, or I can even click the little enter check mark up here, and it gives us the result there. I don't have to do that for every single cell. I can just click and drag all the way down, and that will repeat the formula for the cells beside it. So double checking here. One way to double check the cell, so we can just read what's in the cell, but if you double click, then it shows you the formula, and it shows you the color-coded way that it's built. To get out of this, press escape. So I'm going to press escape on my keyboard, and now we're out of that window. The next thing that I'm going to calculate here is state tax. So we're going to skip federal tax here for a second because this one's a little bit more complicated in how it gets calculated. So here state tax is a pretty simple formula. So state tax in this example is 4% of gross pay. So if we look at the formula that I've already built here, equals 0.04 multiplied by gross pay. And remember, we're using 0.04 because it's 4%. So if we just did it 4 times gross pay, then that would be 4,900 and something. We have to convert that to a decimal. So in this case, 0.04. So to calculate state tax, I'm just going to type equals on the keyboard. I'm going to type in 0.04 multiplied by this cell here. So in the when we calculated gross pay, we were multiplying 2 cells together. Here we're multiplying a specific value times the results of a certain cell. So now that I have that, I can press enter on the keyboard, or I can click that little enter box up there and then click and drag to figure out the rest. So that's for state tax. I have this little format here, just looking at how this is built. So state tax equals 4% of gross pay. So we did 0.04 times the gross pay cell. Federal tax in this case, the way this one is calculated in this example, is a little bit more complicated. Federal tax is 22% of gross pay minus $24.32 for each dependent. So somebody who is caring for others or who has dependents at home, in this example, receives a little bit of a tax break because of that. If we look at the way this is built, the federal tax result here, we have 0.22 multiplied by, so just in the same way that we had 4% here, we're going to do 22%, so 0.22 times, and then this is where brackets, exponents, division, multiplication comes into play. We have to wrap brackets around what we're calculating to make sure that we're doing it in the right format. So here, what we're looking at is there's a $24.32 I guess sort of a credit for each dependent. So we have the number of dependents. We're going to build this little formula by saying the federal tax is 22% of, so multiplied by, in brackets, F4, so the gross pay, minus $24.32 times the number of dependents. So if we look at that, I'll just start typing equals 0.22 times brackets, oops, and that is gross pay, so this cell, minus $24.32, so just type that on the keyboard, times the number of dependents. So this is one of the longer formulas that we've created so far, but just to cover this again, 22% of, so 0.22 times, in brackets, F5, so gross pay, minus $24.32 times the number of dependents. And I'll press enter on the keyboard to get that result, and then I can use the fill handle to drag that down. So we'll continue along creating the content for tax percentage and net pay. Tax percentage is pretty straightforward. If you look at the formula that I have here, it's the total amount of tax taken divided by the total amount of pay. So we have two different types of tax that's taken, in this case federal tax and state tax. We have to add those together before we divide by gross pay. So remember brackets, what's in brackets will be calculated first. So we're going to do in brackets G4 plus H4, so federal tax plus gross pay divided by federal tax plus state tax divided by gross pay. So we can start typing equals brackets, so we'll open that bracket, state tax, and then I'll use plus, then I'll click federal tax, and I'll close the bracket, then the division sign, and we're going to divide by gross pay. And then I can press enter to get that result. I'll use the fill handle to complete for the rest of it. Now we can move on to net pay. So this is the amount of money that's going to be deposited into this person's bank account. Gross pay minus federal tax. So the way we have this formula set up is we're adding the two taxes together, so G4 plus H4 in this case, and we're subtracting that from gross pay. There are a few different ways that you could create this formula. You could just say gross pay minus federal tax minus state tax. That would work as well. But in this case, we're using brackets just to illustrate a point here. So we're going to add the taxes together, and we'll subtract those taxes from the gross pay. So here we'll say equals gross pay. So we'll click that cell, minus, open the bracket, and then we're going to add federal tax to state tax, close the bracket, and press enter. Now we can click and drag to copy that formula down. So now we have some information about our employees in this case for their individual pay and individual salary and tax. Now it's probably worthwhile creating some totals and some other information in general. So we're going to have a totals row here. We're going to have a highest, lowest, and average row as well. So sometimes this might be useful in trying to figure out some trends about the organization, let's say. So we don't really care about the total number of dependents. It's not a useful number here, but the total number of hours worked, total pay rate, gross pay, tax, these are useful things to do. So we can just auto sum the total hours worked, and I'll press enter, and we'll go all the way over to state tax, and we'll do the same for net pay as well. we're going to calculate tax percent a little bit different, and it'll make sense in a minute. But first we're going to look at the figuring out the highest, lowest, and average for some of these rows and columns. Maybe we want to understand the highest number of dependents, the most number of hours worked, and the lowest and the average in these cases as well. So there's a few different ways we can do that. We could just start typing in these formulas. We can also search for them up here. So I have the cell selected, and what I'm trying to figure out in this row here in this cell is the highest number that exists in this range here. So to do that, I can go up to the insert function, and you can search for specific function types. So there's already some functions listed here. So in my case, I already have the max function, and I know that's the one that I'm going to use. So I can click on that, click OK. What range are you going to apply this to? This range right here, and then I can press enter. Another way to do that exact same thing is just typing it out. So equals, and start typing max, double click that, and oh, we don't want the totals. We just want the number of hours worked, and then I can press enter there. As you become more familiar with Excel, you'll remember some of these off the top of your head, but it's totally fine to use the help menu or to search for some solutions on the internet as well. The lowest is really similar. The function is min, and we apply it to this range here. And the average, you start typing average. We're going to use this one here, average, which is the mean. So double click on this, and we're going to apply it here. So if we look at the highest, we are going to drag this across. We'll look at the highest hourly rate, the highest pay, the highest federal tax and state tax. And yeah, we'll do max all the way across. Do the same for min as well. Average, we'll do the same, but we are not going to, I'm going to delete the average tax. We're going to calculate this in a slightly different way. So now we've used totals, highest, lowest, and average to get some more general information about kind of the trends of what's going on in this salary report. So I mentioned we're going to calculate the tax total percentage a little bit differently. So rather than just kind of adding all of this up, that wouldn't really make sense. So in this case, we could just sum the total amount of tax paid, but we can't sum percentages in the same way. So we have to calculate this slightly differently. Here we're going to calculate this by saying equals, and we'll open a bracket, equals the total state tax paid to all of our employees plus the total federal tax paid to all of our employees, and then we'll close the bracket to add those two together, and we'll divide that by the total amount that was paid to all of our employees, and then we can press enter to get that calculation. Now would be a good time to start applying some styles. We have a lot of content in here, and it's getting kind of difficult to read because everything is jammed together. So just like we've done earlier, we'll add this top row we'll merge and center that top row and the second row as well. Maybe we'll change this to a title, and we'll change the format of this one to a title as well, but change the size to be a little bit smaller. And we change the background of both of these, so maybe we'll make it a kind of a blue color, and we'll put a border around this as well, so outside border around that. Now we have our little heading there. We can add a style to this top row as well, so maybe we'll make that a heading number 3, And for the totals row, let's make that a total. Down here, we'll just bold these three. And now we've applied a little bit of style just to help visually organize things a little bit better. In this case, I have added the theme of Ion, so you can change the theme to whatever theme makes sense for you. I've used Ion in this case. So next we'll look at conditional formatting. So conditional formatting allows us to highlight certain values when they meet a certain criteria. So in this case, we are going to highlight the cells that are higher than 72 here. So we're going to highlight the cells where people worked more than 72 hours in the last 2 weeks. Maybe that's a threshold of this company for full-time or some other reason, but conditional formatting can be really, really useful when you want to get an idea at a quick glance of the specifics of the content. So the first thing we're going to do is, just to make things a little bit more consistent, we're going to change the decimal places so that everything is 2 decimal places. You don't have to do that, but just visually it makes it a little bit easier. So to create conditional formatting, we'll highlight the content that we want here and then click on the conditional formatting button. There are a few built-in rules, so you can have color scales. The lowest will be red and the highest will be green. In our case, we're going to create a new rule here. So the rule that we're going to create is format cells that contain a specific value. So we're going to say format cells with a cell value greater than 72. So what's going to happen when the cell value is greater than 72? We have to set a format. If we click the format button here, why don't we make it, the background will turn this kind of dark blue color. So the fill is going to go dark blue, and the font, we're going to change the font color to white. Now we can click OK, and if the cell is greater than 72, this is what it'll look like. We can click OK, and now you see that the cells that are greater than 72, they've changed color. If, for example, I change the value of this to 75, you can see that it updates automatically. I'm going to press undo to get us back to the original. The next thing that we'll do is continue to apply some of the formatting here. So anything that's a dollar value, pay rate, gross pay, federal tax, state tax, tax percentage is not a dollar value. So anything that is a dollar value, we'll highlight that and then click on the number format of accounting. And you can see that I'm going to have to go in and change some widths of the cells here. Net pay is also accounting as well. Tax percentage is not accounting, but it is percent, so we'll click that percent style. So see, right now it's 0.251. We're going to change this to a percentage format, so change to 25%. We can also increase the number of decimal places to make it a little bit more accurate, so we'll do 2 decimal places. Finally, hire date, we can make sure that's the right date format. So we have short date, long date, and there's even more date formats under the more number formats here. If we look at the different date types, include the year, just the month and date, month, day, year. A lot of different formats you can choose. I'm just going to choose this one for right now, and now we know that's a date. Finally, we are going to make these rows, these columns wide enough to fit everything in here. So we can just click and drag to move those over, or just double click and do the same here. And now we have finished our salary report, including the formatting of it.